Welcome to another tutorial, and in this one we're going to be doing averaging of tracking points in Blender, and at the moment we have Blender 2.69. We can click on it to get rid of that flash page, that play splash page, and then go to this little button and go up to our movie clip editor. We're going to go to the open button and go and look for a video of anything. It doesn't really matter at the moment, so we'll just go into here and select a video, and here by scrolling on the middle mouse button we can make it smaller. On the two sides we're going to have, by click dragging, we can make that panel bigger or smaller or disappear. Similarly, our properties one, we can either disappear it completely and that little plus sign will make it pop back, or you can drag it back out. Make sure that your tracking mode down here is selected, because you can select mask, distortion or reconstruction, but we can use tracking here because we're going to do some track points. Over here on this side we are then going to add a marker by clicking on that and then click on a point with this high contrast like this eyeball here. You see it's very small at the moment, but over on this window it shows what you're going to be tracking. We're going to give it a name, and for example we're going to call it number 1 and track that. We're back at 0 and we can adjust that, but it's very big, so let's go down a little bit further and down to this one, marker display. We want to not only see the actual path and what we're tracking, but also the area around it, the search area. If we go down further to marker and down that, we can then change the size of what we're tracking. I want to increase the area that we're tracking because he flings his head around and his eyeball goes all over the place, so I want the program to search in that big area, but it will take a bit more computing power. Similarly, by making that a little bit bigger by clicking on it and dragging it across, we can also just click on it and input the numbers manually, but you'll see when we get to the top we now have a thing that you can click on and drag around to center properly. Now because it's interlaced, I chose this specifically because of that, because that, although it's a good keying thing on a progressive frame, because it's interlaced it's a very horrible and hard to track spot because of all those comb effects. Because when I now go and click the play forward button, it will track it, but you notice it's jumping around because the spot changes shape nearly every frame and it's missing it a lot, and that's why we want to average it. We could, right, we need to pause that, and we can go back by scanning back through that, or use our arrow keys and find that some of our track points have been horrendous. It's tried tracking and it's done a reasonable job because of the high contrast between the black and white. But if I arrow key through, you'll see it's jiggling around a lot. That's why we're going to average out, and that's why I chose this video to show you. You can click on that and you could go back manually and sort of try and figure out and adjust each of those points manually, shift and then move to the next frame, and it will create those average points and you'll get a better track that way. But notice, because of the interlacing, we have one eyeball here in one field and one eyeball of the other field, giving us a very poor track point, even though it looks nice in the screen here. So let's just go along, and where it loses the track point completely, let's just follow that through until it loses it. It will go orange like that, in which case you need to then click on that screen and drag it so that you're back on track again. And you'll notice the last one was also a very poor track, and just for this tutorial we will, and there it's adjusted those tracks okay. I'm just going to do that amount. I'm not going to do the whole track just for this exercise. We'll go back to 0 and create a second marker point so that we can average them out. Add and go through exactly the same process, making sure that our search size is big enough for the program to try and find that point, and make it so that it's encompassing the whole track thing that we're wanting to track. And there's that eyeball, center it and see how well it's going to track it. And it's not doing too badly, even though it's changing drastically. There it just lost it. No wonder, no surprise why. We can also advance forward a frame by frame, and the program tries to recalculate on that frame and take a reference from the one it's just done, rather than a reference point that it had ages ago. Well, I think that's enough of the frames that are just for our exercise. So we have 2 track points. That second track point, we're going to call that up here I number 2. And the first one, if I right click on it to highlight it, is called I number 1. So I've got 2 track points. Oh, and there we go. Sorry, it didn't do it. I number 2, enter. So hopefully they've now got their names I1, I2 by right clicking on them. Let's go now to the node editor. Make sure that you choose this middle button here, one that looks like 2 pages. I spent 2 days trying to find that because that's the one that gives you the use nodes ticked and the backdrop ticket so that you can use the node editor. We don't need this node, so let's just delete it, and we will need the composite one for our final composite output. The first thing we're going to need is to add in the add menu, click on it, and an input movie clip, and that's the movie clip that we had. We're going to use in this little corner box here, click on it, and it drop down menu, and all of the videos that you've input or imported will be there listed. Select the one. At the moment there's only one, but there might be more, so select the right one and it shows in the window. And to view it, we're going to add an output viewer so that we can see it, and if we connect it there you will see that we now have this picture. We can, if we middle scroll on the mouse button, it will make our nodes get bigger and smaller, but if you press the V key it will make the backdrop get smaller, or Alt V to make it get bigger. Okay, that was one that took me a while to figure out too after watching a number of tutorials. Right, now we want to get something that we're going to paste on there. Just let's get an input of an image, for example, and put it here, and just go to the open button here and just go search for one. It doesn't matter where it is, just anything will do. Double click on that and there it pops up. We've got an image, and if we put it over here into the image, you can see the image we have is this. To be able to put the two together, one on top of the other, you're going to add a color mix node. You could use an alpha over node, but this one works fine. You put the background image into the top one as the background image, and you're going to feed the foreground image onto the bottom one, which is going to go on top, like here we are. At the moment you can see it's transparent on this one, black on that one, because alpha channel is not enabled. So if I was to take it down and the output of that to the viewer, you'll see it's black. If I click the button here, it will activate the alpha, and we will now have the transparency of that. Now we have our composition. If we want to change its size and shape and position, we can add a distort node, and it's going to be a transform, so that it gives us parameters to be able to, if we plonk it on top and the cable goes orange, you can just click it and it will connect. You can change the X value by sliding it across or clicking on the number and putting a number in, and it will move it that amount, or you can do exactly the same thing over here on your properties panel. We can change the angle and the scale of it, and I think we will give it a smaller scale so it's something that's going to patch onto his head. So you can reposition that by just dragging it around and stuff. Now, how to get it to move, because if I move the movie forward, the picture has done nothing. It's not moving at all. We need to take that tracking information by adding an input track position node and put it here. In the little box here on the left, a drop down menu, we will select the video that we tracked, because there might be more than one video that you tracked on, and select in the next little box by clicking on it, drop down menu, camera, so it gives us a camera to work with, and in the next box click on it and it'll give you the track points that have been tracked for that video. There's I1 and I2, so let's just select I1. Now if I want to use that, I now have coordinates on every single frame, the tracking points, there is an X and a Y value, and it will change every single frame. So I want to be able to take a transform node. This one is associated with the basic position and size and shape and everything of that foreground image, so we're not going to use that. We're going to add another one. We can select it and can control C, which means control copy, and control V to paste, and now we can feed the X information coordinates into the X of that transform node and the Y into the Y coordinates of the transform node, so that when I connect that transform node, I can take the picture, which is then been adjusted, feed it into the image of that transform node. It means we're going to, it says it's going to move this image by X and Y each time. So the output we're going to then apply to the image of that mix node. Now because this has information that is on this frame, is tracked somewhere, it's now gone and shifted and sized and everything the image off the screen. So I've got to try and figure out where it's gone. I believe if I zero those, go 0, select and 0, angle 0, and size will be 1 as full size, and it should, we should be able to then, maybe it's above the screen, let's just make it go down. Hard to tell where it is. Oh, there it is, up here. I've also noticed that because I copied this, it's also now done it by a third. So let's make this one, for consistency's sake, make it 1, and it should be big. Enter, and there it is, big, so that now I can now see where I'm putting it. I'm going to go in my X negative distance. I'm going to make it smaller, make it my point, say 0.2 for example, to make it nice and small. Now I can raise it, raise it, should I say, not negative it, up to more or less where his head is, and negative, so we're going to place it more or less over where we are tracking on top of his eyes. I'll just lift it so we can see his eyes, and sit it on top of the track point. At the moment we're tracking off this eye number 1, and so now it will use the tracking information. After it is sized and reshaped through this transform node, it will feed that transformed picture into this transform to then take the X and Y coordinates to then put it into here. On the two of them, we're with a transform node, a bicubic transformation is the most accurate. It can go half pixels and very precisely, so we'll put them on that for the type of transform. So now we should be able to see that the picture is using the tracking information to follow that eyeball. Now because it was not very accurate, it will follow it, but it will jitter and judder around, and that's a problem. How to get a smoother one is to get more than one track point and average them. See, that is actually moving with his eyeball, this eyeball here, and not following the other one. So let's average that out by taking this transform node, either adding another one, this tracking point, and we can control copy, control V to make another one. Let's scroll down a bit more to give us more room. So I'm going to use this as my tracking point for eye number 1, and in this box select eye number 2. So tracking point eye 1, tracking point eye 2. We're going to disconnect that one just so we can work with it. And connect that so we've got something pretty to look at. Now the transform nodes, the way we're going to average it, let's disconnect that also, is that you're going to take the X and the X of this one, the X of that one, add them together, then divide them by the number of nodes, which is 2. So we're going to add a maths through the converter to math node. So we've now got a maths node. The maths node, you can see we've got a whole bunch of different ways of doing things, and it's over here in the panel also. All of these different kinds of mathematical calculations you can do. We're just going to use add because we're going to take the x coordinate from this node and the x coordinate from that node and add them together. So this output will be an addition of the two. Then we need to add an input node, and it's going to be a value node, which just is basically a number node. We're going to do our division, so we're going to select that one and then Control C, Control V to copy it and put it over there, and then select our divide. So now we're going to take the result of that addition and feed it into there, and then we are going to divide it obviously by this number, and we're going to divide it by 2. So let's just input the 2 there and feed it into that socket. The output of this socket will therefore be the 2x values added together and then divided by 2 to give you an average of the 2x values. We're going to do exactly the same thing. Copy V for the y coordinate, in which case we're going to take the y from the top first I track and then the y from the second I track, add it together and get an output. We're going to then Control copy, Control V, and then I'm going to feed the output of that addition of the y coordinates into the maths node, which is a divide, and then copy, Control V, so that we now have another copy of the 2 value. So now we're going to have the y's, the 2 y's adding together, then divided by 2. So I'm going to get a final averaged x, averaged y. Now I want to tidy things up a little bit here and make a node that I can probably use again somewhere. So I'm going to click on that and then shift click to select them one by one, those 6 nodes there, and then I'm going to go down to node, then up to make group, or press the Control G, and it gives me this situation. I have an output node and an input node that it automatically generates so that you can use it as a group thing. So it has no plugs at the moment, and it's reflected here no plugs, but if I take the output of that x value and put it down to where a plug might be, it will generate one and give me a value here. Because that's the x value that's come through here, I can change the name of that to the x value. Enter. Similarly with the y, I can drag that plug to where a plug might be, and it clicks on there, makes another one, and I can change it to the y label, so that when I press the tab button or the key, it will then show that I now have a node with all of those in it, with the x and the y values plugs that are going to come out. Now you'll see here that they going to the x value and the y values, they're swapped around. It would be nice to tidy that up, so I can go back into selecting that, press the tab and swap them around. It automatically basically took my 2 x's and made them tidy like that, but I want to actually swap them around and make it so that I've got my top one will be an x and a y, then the next one will be an x, and the next one will be a y down to here. So that will make it tidied. Now to label it, I'll take those values up here. It will be the first track position x, then the next one will be a value y, the next one will be the value x of the second track point, and the next one will be the y of that value, so that when I hit tab it will close it down, and then we will need to swap that over. So now that I have my X going to my X, Y going to Y, X to X, and Y to Y. So it's neat and tidy. Now, like we had before, that single track point going through the transform node, I can now do exactly the same thing. I can take the picture and feed it into my transform, the foreground picture, and disconnect it from there, and take the X and the Y coordinates from the tracking averaged node, X and Y, and then feed that final information into the mixer. And now I may have to make some adjustments slightly for that now averaged point, because now that average point is going to be basically between the eyes, but right, an average point between the two tracking points will be around about here, and that's the point we're now going to track, and it's going to be the two coordinates average, so it's going to be a lot smoother. So now it will follow that point between his eyes. And now we have that situation where you can actually add more nodes and more points to average by adding another track point, and then in this, by tabbing it, adding an extra branch, so that you'll have another two more plugs for another coordinate tracking point. Go through the same process, and at the end you may have to then combine two of those and then combine again to then have a single XY output. Tab again to get out of that, and there you have averaged tracking points, which will smooth it out. That's single point tracking, but with more than one point averaged. Have fun with it. There it is, tracking. A lot smoother, and from a point between his eyes.